New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community, proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Today we are talking with James Coddington of Joy Business Academy, and we're going to drill into his business story of his tech startup. And this is a pretty interesting one because when COVID came along, they saw their revenues basically fall off a cliff, but really things have turned around since then. So looking forward to hearing your story, James. How are you?
Oh, thank you for having me, Paul. Yeah, pretty good.
Excellent.
A lot better now than I was in lockdown 4.
Yeah. Well, I'm keen to hear a little bit. Where did you start out in business? Obviously, there's been a journey that sort of got you into the startup world and so on. But what's your background?
Depends how far you want to go back. Graduated from university, like a lot of people did, and went on their OE. Found myself as a ski bum over in Colorado, living on couches and enjoying life as a skier. And quickly found that I didn't have any money, and that kind of sucked. And I wanted to create some. And back then, this was in the early 90s, mid 90s, and it was pretty early days of the web. And I was watching these pretty cool things happen. So travel was a big part of my life, and online travel came on in America, and it still wasn't really talked about down under. So it was a private lesson. I took a guy out named Bill Bennett, who was the CEO of Concord Travel at the time in Australia, a really large travel consortium. And he was telling me about a story of him and 3 of his buddies were going to create an online travel business. I said, that sounds really cool. I'd created a wholesale business in Colorado and did it all through tech. And we took out the middle person, so we were wholesaling directly to the customer. And I thought, well, what a great opportunity to connect with these guys. They're certainly very experienced. I had a lot more knowledge than me as a ski bum, so I thought I could learn a little bit. And I went back to Sydney with my partner, and we were part of that startup called travel.com.au, which then became the first .com business to float on the stock exchange on the ASX. So that was really fun. I was early, mid-20s, and it was a hell of a ride for a couple of years, and then went on and created an online veterinary business, advisory for animal health. Why animal health? I really don't know. I saw a problem that needed to be solved and did that for 7 years, and then found myself back in Queenstown as a ski bum again, working for the ski fields, and did that for 7 years. And the problem I saw, which was I could see in the business that I was working in NZ Ski, there was a lot of young, enthusiastic people who had great education, but they didn't actually know how they could take their education and be able to commercialise that. And so many of them found themselves in the ski industry because they were passionate about skiing and snowboarding. And so I thought, well, surely there's got to be a better way for these individuals to utilise their education. So we created an internal university at NZ Ski, and that was really the first part of my passion, which led me into education. And a little bit differently, we actually started Joy Business Academy called Joy Ice Cream. Why ice cream? Well, I'll get to that. So we wanted to understand what the skills gaps were between for individuals that were highly educated, but they were out of work. They couldn't utilise their qualifications, degrees in a way that they could find jobs. And
it seems to be a common challenge, doesn't it?
It is, and it was a global challenge, and we could see this growing. And even though the unemployment rate was going down in New Zealand, the youth unemployment was going up. So what we did was, it was largely as an R&D project. We created these really fun, visually exciting pods, which we gave to what we called young, they were remarkable unemployees, we called them. So basically they're out of work. They were out of work for a good year. And we gave them an apprenticeship to own and run their own business. It just happened to be ice cream. We set them up all over New Zealand, and we gave them the opportunity to set up where they wanted to, market themselves, communicate to their customers, and largely do everything that a normal business would do. We chose ice cream because it was very New Zealand-esque. It was also a product that had good margin, and we thought, well, it's also pretty damn impossible to not smile when you're eating ice cream. So we thought, well, that's a good place to start.
Seems like a good combo. How did it go?
So 3 years down the track, 256 people we put through the apprenticeship program. Not one of them went back to unemployment.
Fantastic.
So from a social impact point of view, fantastic. From a commercial point of view, nearly bankrupted me. They were not so good at paying their bills, and we learned a lot. So we also learned what the skills gaps were. Resilience was lacking, problem solving, interpersonal communication. I guess a lot of the skills that the World Economic Forum call soft skills, or the skills which are really important for every industry. And so we went about digitizing that. And we started off by creating standard e-learning. And what I call standard e-learning, everyone was doing it at the time, and we thought we could do it a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, it was like most other people. And we actually found our way to government at that point. We started working with Ministry of Social Development, and a lot of their cohort, or their customers, if you like, had low literacy, and also English was perhaps not their first language. And we found that delivering that kind of training and e-learning was not delivering high learning outcomes. So we went back to the drawing board, really, and to try and understand, how do you create engagement? Because engagement creates learning outcomes. And I'm not a gamer, never have been a gamer, but I was reading a lot about how the gaming industry globally was growing double-digit growth year on year. It was heading towards $1 trillion industry. It just phenomenal type of growth. It's like, what are they doing so uniquely that perhaps we could learn in the education space? So I spent a good 3 months of my life going around and immersing myself in gaming companies, and I was absolutely staggered at what they were creating digitally. And as you would know, Paul, it's they create fun, they create engagement, they create this immersive experience with a healthy appetite, healthy competition, but also a sprinkle of addiction thrown in there. And I was like, wow.
Well, it varies how much of whether it's a sprinkle or
more,
a lot,
doesn't it? Or a lot,
gaming?
yeah. So I was like, well, I've never heard education described in any of those terms. So if we could take the gaming, the core of what gaming delivers, and deliver it in an educational sense and purpose with an educational outcome, surely we're going to have really high learning outcomes. So we did. Blindly, we brought on a whole lot of game developers.
What stage was that?
Three. So that would have been 3.5 years ago.
Okay.
And we went to recreate what we'd basically been doing in the ice cream world in a digital world. So we created these Tycoon series, which was about giving people the opportunity to play a game, but actually creating their own business while playing that game. And we integrated, some of the New Zealand's leading businesses. So we had BNZ in there, we had Microsoft, Xero, BDO. There was some others which they'll be Microsoft, just a small company. So we had all these different companies integrated into the game. So they weren't just learning how to play a game, they're learning actually how to set up Xero, how to interact and pay bills through Xero, how to use an accountant in an advisory capacity in BDO, how to get a mortgage, or how to loan money from a bank. All of those things, but we did in a game. And then we launched that to the schools. We had a national schools competition, and that was hugely successful. And we just saw this engagement. And what was some of the best things that we saw were, year 10 students was really the sweet spot, and they were playing the game, and then they were being tested from a business studies at year 13 level. So what they were learning in a game was a lot more powerful than what they're learning in the classroom.
Fantastic.
And so that kind of got us thinking, it's like, wow, this immersion is really quite powerful. And we were always looking for how do we create a more immersive experience to create even better learning outcomes. And that's when virtual reality came along, and Oculus came out with their Oculus, which is a headset owned by Facebook, came out with the first untethered headset. And what I mean by that is, up until then, VR has been largely a headset, but it's been tethered to a big old computer.
You need a pretty powerful computer to run them, didn't you, in those early days, whereas the portable Oculus equipment is pretty light. You pop it on your head and away you go.
You just need Wi-Fi. That's all you need. Yeah. So that was a game changer for us, because that meant all of a sudden virtual reality could not only go into workplaces, but the price had come down so much. You're paying $399 for a headset, whereas before you were thousands of dollars. So the barrier to entry dropped away completely, but the real barrier was still the cost of creating these virtual reality scenarios, and there's still $300,000 plus to create these things. So we thought, well, after doing a little bit of research and talking to customers, we realized that they all wanted the same thing. So instead of charging 10 different customers the same thing to do the same, we thought, well, we'll invest in this, we'll create scenarios ourselves, put it in the cloud, and sell it as a SaaS product. And that's what we did.
So people are just paying a subscription effectively, rather than having to invest the $300,000.
Yeah. So a small company with 2 or 3 people in their organisation can now adopt VR for training and qualifications, whereas that was just a pipe dream before. That was generally what really large businesses with huge budgets could actually afford to do.
Yeah, I remember an experience with Ford. And I went to a research and development centre they had, and they had a few of them around the world. This particular one was in Melbourne, and so they had a augmented reality type of situation. I mean, at their stage, it was they would have spent a lot of money. I think the virtual reality system hardware was at least $300,000. They had basically a frame of a car. And it was, you put the headset on, you were sitting in the car, but it would help them in the design. And of course, now that stuff's a commodity type level where you don't have to be a Ford, obviously, to afford it.
No, and exactly right. So that's great. I think that's one of the big opportunities in education, and why we're focusing in the education space is because what VR can actually achieve in education is you reduce the time it takes to learn a concept, but also you apply that concept in a real world environment. And so you're not only learning, you're applying. And so as an example, you might have 8 hours of classroom, you can actually reduce that down to like 30 minutes. So not only are you able to reduce the time it takes to train, you also increase the learning outcomes tremendously. So they say, a traditional classroom style tutorial or a training session is around about 30% is your recognition of learning or your learning outcome.
Yes.
And in a VR environment, you're getting up to 98%. And I mean, it's not rocket science, because if you can immerse someone in an experience, they're having fun, they're experiential, so they're actually able to apply what they're learning. Of course, they're going to learn and remember those things, as opposed to, it really depends on how good the tutor is or how good the person who's delivering,
you're also
the facilitator.
In a normal school scenario, you're in a room with a whole lot of other people, right? And so that has to go at the level where hopefully everybody keeps up. There can be a lot of variability. I mean, personally, I remember as it was about an 8-year-old a period where I studied through correspondence school because our family was doing some travelling, and we were doing maybe half the length of time we would have done in a classroom for each day's study, and I think in theory we were supposed to be achieving about the same level. So, but with what you're saying with virtual reality, you could take your day's education down to 30 minutes. If you can do that, I think there'd be a lot of youngsters lining up and saying, yeah, I'll do 8:30 a.m. till 9 a.m. as my school day. Thanks.
My son would be very excited. That would mean 8:30 to 9 o'clock doing classroom stuff, and then he'd be out in the field kicking his ball around like they should be. Yes, I mean, the opportunities really are only just being explored at the moment. So if you talk to Oculus, which is the biggest provider of the untethered headset, they're creating, if you like, the iTunes of VR in their suite. And last time I talked to them, 98% of all VR on their suite at the moment in their library is games. So only 2% currently is education, but the education's growing at over 20%. So very quickly it's being adopted, and it's not just being adopted by crazy scientists like myself and the JPA team. It's being adopted by very reputable universities, which are now training their surgeons. University of London are training their surgeons in VR. And they've already come out with these really compelling studies that they're able to increase their ability and speed of adopting a certain technique significantly faster than the people who are using cadavers even. So that's pretty cool. So the adoption and the opportunity is not just in what we do, which is around the compliance training, learning, and trying to make what I would call relatively dull health and safety training into some fun, vibrant, exciting training which people remember and ultimately create a safer work environment for them.
Well, yeah, just joining up the dots there. If you can learn quicker, and I mean, there's so much time and money that goes into a lot of education. The flow on of that when we look a few years out. Now, you mentioned about $300,000 to put something together.
Yeah.
What does that deliver? Because I can imagine if you were trying to build a virtual reality, course for medical purposes. I mean, you could spend a whole lot more money than that, probably a limitless amount of money. And I imagine there's a level of sort of continuous improvement that goes into these things.
There is
as well.
Yeah. So first of all, we look. We've partnered with Ministry of Social Development around solving problems around the redeployment, retraining and reskilling of the workforce, which we are obviously now, unfortunately, are out of work. And we're looking to industries which have the best opportunity and where they have the availability of trying to get people into that industry. And so the challenge which government has, not just in this country, but every country, is how do we train people which have skills in other industries, but how do we train them faster? How do we make sure that they've got the appropriate skills before they go on sites in the construction industry, or perhaps go into shops or wherever they may be doing? So the opportunity around that from a VR perspective is what is required to work in that industry. So that's where we start. So if you look at construction as a vertical, we look at what is required to get on site. So you've got foundational skills that you have to have, talking like construct safe or site safe, or some of those. They're qualifications that everybody must have before they go on site. And then perhaps, so that's what we call the foundational skills. And then on top of the foundation, where are they going to work? Are they a carpenter? Are they a labourer? Are they going to be working at heights? Are they going to be working in confined spaces? So we look at all of those different areas. And we like to say that we're trying to create, I use the analogy of Netflix. Most people understand what Netflix is, especially over lockdowns. You're creating a series. So when you're going into a construction industry job, you have a series of different qualifications you require and you have to have before you go on site. And it's not just looking at, say, a pilot. You're just taking a piece of that. You have to literally deliver all of those, and we have to deliver that in a fraction of the time. So what we do is we work with New Zealand NZQA, because that's the minimum standard. We work with WorkSafe, which they're obviously they're the police of when things go wrong, but they're also being very proactive to make sure people have the appropriate skills before they go on site. So we work with all these different people, but then we work with industry. So we create this group of subject matter experts that build these things. So as you can see, it's quite technical, but and to answer your question, $300,000 basically buys you about 30 to 40 minute VR scenario, which is aligned to a qualification. So instead of doing like a New Zealand Security Association, there's 3 unit standards. You might spend a couple of days doing that. Well, through our VR scenario, you're able to do that in a fraction of the time. But not only that, you're able to deliver it to people who perhaps couldn't do it before because they had language challenges or perhaps had literacy challenges. So there's not just reducing the time, but you're also able to open it up to more learners. So MESD have been a great partner for us because they identify where the problems are, and we put a global lens over that and go, well, these are the problems which we're facing in New Zealand. Is this the same problems that have been faced in America, for instance? Because that's a focus of ours in our business, and largely they are. We talk about the post-COVID world because we're getting a little complacent in New Zealand, but we are in a different place than perhaps they are in America and even in Europe.
Definitely, yeah.
And so what we're doing here is almost the canary in the coal mine for them to have a look at what's actually happening, where their opportunities are.
What does the future look like?
What does the future look like? Yeah.
It's right here, right now.
It is. And that's really good opportunities because we actually do have some good credibility in the States. And they're looking to what we're doing here in New Zealand, which has opened up a tremendous number of opportunities post-COVID.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about with COVID. Now I heard that your revenue basically fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
And I guess there were varying sectors where that happened, and in a lot of cases it hasn't come back. How's that actually played out for you? Because when I think about the concept of learning, this is something that we all need to do. COVID has caused a lot of disruption to various employment. So how's that played out for you to build things up again and to keep going? Have you managed to hold on to your team generally?
Yeah, so generally yes.
Because you've got 60 people around the world?
Yeah, that's right. So we've been fortunate that we've been able to retain a good amount of our team. But the challenge which we faced was like a lot of other businesses. I woke up in lockdown 4 and just saw all these emails saying, we're putting this on hold, we're stopping this, we're not doing this. So seeing your revenues, drop from $1 million a month down to, dollars, but you still had, a good amount of people that you were having to support and ensure that you didn't want to lay them off. It was really challenging. First of all, we turned to our bank, and BNZ were tremendously supportive and gave us a working capital loan, which allowed us to give the assurances to our team that they had a job until at least end of June. And keep in mind, we were having this conversation with our team in March, so they had some continuity. They had some security around what they were doing, and that was really helpful. That's
awesome, and it does seem to vary from bank to bank in terms of how geared up they are for that type of lending, right?
Yeah,
so
it was.
You were in a good. That was a good outcome that you may not necessarily have had if you were with
someone else,
some of the other banks. So.
You're probably right. I wouldn't know because we've only ever banked with BNZ. So fortunately, we had a good balance sheet and we didn't have any lending up until that point. And we had a good story that which was being played out. But having said that, our revenue fell off the cliff, and we had one or two choices. We could, throw the hat in the ring and say that's it, we're done, we're walking away from this, or we double down and really understand, is the problem that we're going to be solving in the COVID world still relevant? And the answer to that was yes, hell yes. And we're going to be needed a lot more in a COVID world than actually what we thought we were needed in a pre-COVID world.
Yeah.
So we were in a fortunate position, and look, you can't engineer these things, but we found ourselves with a lot of tailwind behind us. So even though our business levels haven't returned to the pre-COVID level, we've now got more momentum in behind us than we ever had before. And if COVID assisted us with anything, it was awareness, creating awareness amongst every industry that they could train, redeploy, reskill their teams in a different way. And not only do they have to do that, there's actually a better way. And so you're actually able to get their ear a lot easier in the post-COVID world than trying to convince some pretty traditional thinkers that learning in a classroom is actually a better way. And so that was really helpful for us, and also it allowed us to, I guess, reposition our goals, because before COVID we were focused on delivering into tourism, retail, hospo, which is kind of ironical really, because those were the three industries which were really massively impacted and affected. Hence
why you took such a hit.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, as an example, we were doing work with Burger King, and unfortunately, we know what happened with that organisation. So there was a lot of challenges which we were faced with, but we were able to turn our focus around to be really myopically focused on a few industries. Instead of doing 16 that we were doing pre-COVID, we really focused in the construction sector, security, and building out a deeper proposition, going back to the Netflix analogy, creating a series as opposed to some pilots. And that's been really helpful for us. And now we're getting back into tourism, partnered with ATED, and we're doing some really cool stuff in that space. So they're not dead. No, they're just coming back into life again, because I think most industries understand training will never disappear. And when tourism does come back on, which it will, I have absolute confidence it will, we're going to have to learn to train them more effective than we've ever had to do before, which is speed and learning outcomes. And so we're now getting back into that and starting to really refocus in how do we recover from COVID, and how do we as a business help and support those industries as they get back on their feet.
Yeah. Now, with the business, how have you funded the business, from the get-go? Sort of bootstrap type thing, or have you got a lot of external funding?
No, we bootstrapped it for the first few years. And
self-funded for those that
self-funded, yes.
This.
So when I started, I was a very wealthy person, and I'm not a very wealthy person anymore. We used to have 3 houses. I don't have any now. Yes. So my family have been, they sacrificed a lot to get to where we are now. But as I said, we don't need houses. We're actually building something which is really exciting, really cool, and we get the opportunity to help change people's lives. If that doesn't excite you, well, nothing will. So yes, we bootstrapped it for the first few years, and then we're fortunate enough to bring in some external investors over a period of time, and now we're getting a few more sophisticated investors into the business, which is quite challenging for an entrepreneur, creative like myself, who likes to call the shots and likes to
probably like to have a lot of freedom and
and I think that there's always a challenge with when you start giving up some of those freedoms, but also I would say I probably need to build some disciplines as well. When I was going back to my ski bum days, what were the disciplines that got me to where I was, and sometimes you lose sight of that. So I think there's a balance, when you're creating your own business, to create the agileness, the nimbleness, and the freedom to do what you want to do, but you also need to have the disciplines to make sure you don't become a seagull, as someone once described me as, who swoops down on any shiny object below. So I don't think I'm a seagull anymore, but I still enjoy my freedoms.
Yeah. Fascinating. So tell us a little bit about the the technologies that are involved. You mentioned Oculus.
Yep.
Before we started, you mentioned another company as well, Pico.
Yep.
With some, looks like some quite capable, headsets and the like. What are the key bits that really make this possible? Because if we look back a decade and you had been trying to build this business a decade ago, it just wouldn't have been possible. And that's the nature of what tech enables is so many new businesses, and we look at in New Zealand and things like Rocket Lab. There's really, I think, a pretty interesting mix of tech startups here. Some of those are very purely software, and things being invented now. Could have, if the ideas were around and the funding was there, have maybe happened in years gone by. But yours is one that you're very much tied to the cutting edge of technology that is rapidly becoming more and more affordable, right?
It is. You're right. 2 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to create our business. One, the barrier to entry was too large for organisations to adopt VR technology. You're talking minimum $10K US, and it wasn't mobile. So when the first mobile devices came out, that was a game changer for us. So we work with Oculus, which was bought by Facebook 4 years ago for $2.8 billion, and they've invested probably that again. Having Facebook owning hardware is probably not the best idea in the world, in my opinion, because they're already starting to bring in a lot of barriers to using their hardware, which has to be linking to Facebook.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that requirement to have a Facebook account isn't something that probably lines up particularly well from a business perspective, is it?
No, it doesn't. Nor from a large organisation where you've got a hybrid of individuals, which not everyone has a Facebook account. So on that basis, we have been exploring other opportunities. So there's a great company called Pico, which is a Norwegian company, and they've got amazing technology, which we've just we're trialing now in our offices. They're very new, exactly the same. They're an untethered headset, slightly more expensive, but they don't have the restrictions around what Facebook are starting to bring in. So from our perspective, we're relatively agnostic. We just want to work with an untethered headset which provides the very best solution as well as experience to our customers. So when we build our technology, we actually build the technology in a program called Unity, which most gamers will understand and know. And so from that, it's really important that we don't just align ourselves to one headset, so we can actually use headsets because they're evolving all the time. Apple's coming out with a new headset, Google's coming out, Microsoft will be as well. So there's a bit of a race going on at the moment around who's going to own the virtual reality space. And as I said earlier, at the moment, virtual reality is very much dominated by games. Now education is coming up. They want to own that, and use the analogy of iTunes. So if you think of iTunes, which music is to iTunes and iTunes is to music, well, there's going to be a very similar race around who's going to own the virtual reality space, and all the big four are fighting over that, which is great for organisations like ours because they're just pushing the price down of the headsets. So the new headset for Oculus came out, it's $299 USD. That's pretty cheap, and all you need is a Wi-Fi. And Pico's not much more expensive than that. So they're not making a lot of money from their hardware. Where they make their money is creating these iTunes-like stores where people buy different products from that store.
And they clip the ticket on those things. So how does that work for you at the moment? Because you've got obviously creating the educational content is really a fairly expensive thing to do in each case. I imagine what the varying partners that you work with, and whether it's a an educational type of institution, or whether it's an organisation that works across a sector, or it's government, etc. They'll have particular ways that suit them to acquire. So can you bypass these sorts of stores, or do you have an element that goes through those things, and then separate subscription things that go on top? Is that complicated and a challenge, and something that you're wondering how it's going to play out over the next few years?
Yeah, so that has been a big challenge. Right from the start, Oculus has made it very clear that there's an Oculus for business and it's an Oculus for consumer. The Oculus for consumer is $299 USD. The Oculus for business is a $1,000 USD. And they charge you $180 USD per headset per year. So very early on, we had to come up with solutions whereby our customers could use the consumer headset but work within our framework. So we created what we call our facilitator app. So when you're doing a VR experience, and they're multiplayers, so one person could be sitting in this office with a VR headset on, another person could be in our San Francisco office, and then the facilitator who's actually assessing and working with those people in their headsets could be sitting in London, for instance.
Okay,
so
cool.
they can be all different locations, but you all meet up together in the cloud in a VR environment. And so we created that, and that was the first of its kind in the world. We had to do that to allow our customers the ability to connect remotely. And when you think of our first customer in this was Ministry of Social Development, and they have multiple locations throughout the country, and the vision was that somebody in Gore can interact with somebody in Kerikeri, and you could have a facilitator sitting in the MSD Wellington office, and you're going through that whole scenario together. And so fortunately that worked out really well for us, because now we've come out as a market leader globally, because we've created a really unique proposition that connects to not only Oculus's headset but any other headset, and the headset becomes a tool in what we're delivering, but it doesn't have to be Oculus. It can be other headsets as well. So we're very, very fortunate in the space that we found ourselves in, because we could have gone down another road. As all tech businesses know, you get to a lot of junctures and you've got to choose which road to take. We're fortunate we took the right road on that one. Trust me, not every road has been the right road.
So what are some of the hardest challenges that you've dealt with over this period?
Apart from cash flow, paying our team. I think you're talking about over the COVID experience,
in particular. Although, I'm always interested with business journeys in terms of those different sort of turning points and challenges along the way.
So when you think of just rewind what I was saying earlier on, when we started a business, it was ice cream, and we had to make a really big step to go from the ice cream into the technology, and then within that technology we also had to take another step away from traditional what everybody wanted, which was e-learning, and go into the gamification of learning. And that was a massive, I think, going from e-learning to the gamification of learning was the biggest step that we had to make, and that was very risky, because we were in a safe and secure place in the e-learning. We had good business, we had good customers, it was ticking over.
Right. So you actually had to give up something that was
we did.
You could say, well, we've got a solid business here, and you actually had to sort of flush that, basically.
We did. We had 14 staff. It was very manageable, and we were doing some pretty cool stuff in the e-learning space. We got good customers, but I was not satisfied. I didn't start this business to become a solid business in New Zealand. I wanted to create a globally leading organisation which was changing people's lives. And what we were doing was not changing people's lives. It was just really clipping the ticket of what everyone else was doing. So it wasn't a hard decision for me, but we went from 14 staff to 28 staff within months. And we brought in these game engineers, which were expensive. We brought in designers. We brought in all these, which I didn't know anything about. And that was a massive risk for us. It paid off. We're now in a unique position with very few competitors because we took those risks. Some of the risks that we took didn't work out for us. I mean, we've made some crazy decisions, wrong decisions, cost us, etc.
What's the silliest decision you've made?
Well, I think the silliest decision I made personally was when we're first starting the business in the first year. We with my co-founder, who it was very much design focused, created these beautiful pods, and I thought it was a grand idea to get 20 of those built. Cost us a fortune. 600,000 to be exact.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, that's a really good idea, James. We didn't have 600,000, but we had so much confidence we're going to sell these to these remarkable unemployees. Well, no one told me that the remarkable unemployees don't have any money. So no one was buying these pods, and that nearly broke us. Well, it nearly broke me as well. That was probably the craziest decision I've ever made in this business anyway, which didn't work out so well.
But there are always going to be those things, and you have to. You have to make a decision and just keep going forward, don't you?
Yeah.
So
back yourself.
Any successful business story is going to be littered with all of those things, and then the learnings that come out of them, which maybe years later when you stack it up, the 600,000 may well pale in comparison to the value that actually came out of that, and how things played out in the future, right?
That's
what you hope for.
That's
anyway.
what I described to my wife at the time. Yes, yes, and it's absolutely right. If there's one ingredient, people ask a lot. So what's the key ingredient which you need to create a successful business? And that is grit and resilience, and having the perseverance to overcome obstacles, because it doesn't matter what business you start or how amazing it looks on paper. I guarantee it won't end up being what it was when you first drew it down on paper, and having the ability to overcome those obstacles. If you can do that, well, you can achieve anything. And I know that might sound cliche, but you really can, because there's been many a time where I've sat in the office on a Wednesday night knowing that I've got a $300,000 pay run happening the next day, wondering where the hell that money's going to come from. And thankfully we're through those times, but it is challenging, and you have to find ways to circumnavigate some of those challenges. And also it can be very lonely, because you can't really share that with your staff. Hey guys, I'm not sure how I'm going to pay you tomorrow, but you might have a mass exodus walking out the door.
Some of that is got to be common to many that are involved in startups, whether they're tech businesses or not. Where to from here, and what do you think the potential is? I'm always very interested hearing about Kiwis especially who are building businesses that can really be selling products and services to the world. And yours sort of sits firmly in that place. You're already operating I think most of your team here in New Zealand, but you've got
Philippines,
some in Philippines, and
US.
something in the US as well.
So if I haven't come across already, I'm hugely excited about the potential and the opportunities that we are facing globally. Where are we going? Well, 3 years' time, it'll be $1 billion business. I have no doubt about that, and that's going to be created and achieved in the US. We already have pilots happening in the US right now with 750,000 employees across the construction sector, and the opportunities that we see through our partnerships with some really large organisations, the UN, Smithsonian, the National Academies of Sciences, EY, all these really fantastic organisations believe in what we're doing around the future of work, and the opportunities that we've been able to achieve in New Zealand with 5 million people. When you start putting a lens over that with 350 million people, boy, that gets exciting. And that's what really drives me, is being able to be a part, an integral part to the recovery post-COVID, and getting these people into work in a fraction of the time, creating learning outcomes that have never been seen before. And in the process, we get to have a hell of a lot of fun at the same time, live in San Francisco, do some pretty cool things, and ultimately be that global leader in what we're doing. And our challenge right now is we are a global leader from New Zealand. We can't travel right now. How do we connect to our partners, which we have partners in Singapore, which are looking after the Asian market. We've got partners in the US. I can't get there. So it's been really challenging to adopt our sales strategy around a remote business model when largely to sell our product, you put a headset on someone's head and you take them to those opportunities. So we're learning, but it certainly is creating some challenges because what we enjoy here in New Zealand is not what is the reality in America. There's still a lot of people not going back to the offices, and there is a lot of challenges there. But that's also opportunity for us, and that's where we get hugely excited about of how we can develop, create and deliver our products from New Zealand with our partners in these other countries.
Now, tech obviously enables you to get rid of some of those barriers, but I guess technically you could go to the States if you wanted to.
Yep, I can. Yep.
But you're risking your health and everything else, and in terms of coming back into New Zealand is not a particularly nice experience when you've got effectively 2 weeks in lockdown to do it. Is that how it sort of stacks up for you? Because I've been chatting to a few people recently where I'm hearing, oh yeah, I'm heading off to the US, and I'm thinking, really? Well, I'm not signing up for that at the moment.
Yeah. So yes, I will be going to the US, and that's probably in about February. We're raising capital in out of the US, and we have several funds which are really interested to do so, and I've promised that I'd be there in person for that those presentations. It doesn't concern me greatly, as long as you look after yourself and you wear your masks and sanitary and all of those things. But coming back into New Zealand, look, it's just what you have to do now. It's the new normal. Look, I wouldn't jump over to Australia to go to a meeting and come back and spend 2 weeks. But I'd be in the States for probably a month and do the work I need to do and come back to New Zealand, and I will be happy to go through the quarantine and go through that process. It's just something you have to do. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, we wouldn't want that stripped away. It's an
no, not at all.
Safety barrier.
It is, and my family right now, my 2 kids, 9-year-old and 18-year-old daughter, they're in quarantine right now, and I have to say it's been a pretty good experience for them. Although I did get a text before I came on here. My wife was about to kill my son, so I didn't know whether to call the police on that or not. But he's 9. He's not used to be locked up in a hotel room. But I just think it's the new normal. I think that's just something that you have to commit to, and we're very committed to the US market. To do that, we need to raise capital in the US, and it's just a necessity really of what we have to do.
Right. Now, those that are interested in finding out a little bit more, maybe they're wondering whether you're a place that they should be working, any of those sorts of things. What's the best way to get in touch? Yeah,
well, our website's joybusinessacademy.com or skillsvr.com, and you can depends on what it is you want to contact us on, or you can just contact me directly, just james@joybusinessacademy.com. Love to help, especially if there's anyone looking for jobs in the tech industry, and always looking for amazing talent who want to work in an organisation which is helping people's lives.
Yeah, well, I like that you bring together two things that I think New Zealand is very good at, which is innovation, using technology, and then also the creative talents that we have here in New Zealand, and of course that's also helped us on the tourism front as well, in terms of attracting people to see what they've seen in the movies. So it's really good. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you, James.
No, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. And look, a huge thank you also to our partners, to Sumo Logic, Vodafone, Spark, Vocus, HP, Samsung, Gorilla Technology, and Umbrella Connect. Now, it's their support of this show and of the technology and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand that really makes them stand out. So, please support our partners. All right, that's it. We'll catch you next week for our next show. Cheers.
New Zealand's Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community, proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.